They called humans the plague species, a crude, violent race that conquered through brutality and enslaved through force. When Captain Marcus Chen of the Earth Defense Corps defeated the Zephyrian Empire's most elite squadron in single combat, he claimed their princess as his prize according to ancient galactic law. The Alien Council expected another tale of human savagery. They were wrong. What happened next would reshape the galaxy forever. A gentle princess would become the most feared military strategist in known space, and a human warrior would discover that sometimes the greatest victory comes not from taking a prize, but from setting it free. This is the story of how two unlikely allies turned the tide of an intergalactic war and proved that humanity's greatest weapon was never their capacity for violence, it was their capacity for choice. The galaxy would never be the same. The Zephyrian warship Celestial Wind drifted in the void like a dying whale, its crystalline hull cracked and bleeding atmosphere into space. Captain Marcus Chen pressed his palm against the cool metal of his fighter's viewport, watching the enemy vessel's elegant lines buckle under the weight of its own destruction. Beautiful, even in defeat. All stations report in, Marcus commanded into his calm, his voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. The Battle of Kepler 442 had lasted 18 hours, and the human fleet had emerged victorious through tactics that would have seemed impossible just decades ago. Wolverine Squadron, all birds accounted for, sir. Tiger Squadron, 3 casualties but were operational. Phoenix Squadron reporting successful boarding operation. The Zephyrian flagship is secured. Marcus allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The Zephyrian Empire had controlled this sector for over 3,000 years. Their military doctrine was flawless, their technology superior, their warriors bred for combat across multiple generations. On paper, the human fleet should have been obliterated within the first hour. But humans didn't fight by the book. Phoenix leader, what's the status on prisoners? Marcus asked, already knowing the answer would complicate his day. Sir, we have approximately 200 crew members in custody, including... A pause. Including Princess Lyralii of House Zephyr. The comm channel fell silent. Marcus could feel the weight of that statement settling over his bridge crew like a heavy blanket. Princess Lyralii wasn't just any royal, she was the daughter of Emperor Valdris himself, commander of the 7th Fleet, and, according to intelligence reports, one of the most promising military minds the Zephyrian Empire had produced in centuries. Understood, Phoenix leader. Maintain security protocols. I'm coming aboard. Marcus stood from his command chair, straightening his uniform. The fabric was still singed from when his fighter had taken a direct hit from a plasma cannon, but military protocol demanded proper appearance when dealing with alien nobility. Even when that nobility was now technically his prisoner. The journey to the captured flagship took 20 minutes through the debris field. Marcus used the time to review what he knew about Zephyrian culture and law. The Empire operated under ancient codes that had governed galactic warfare for millennia. Victory in single combat granted the winner certain rights over the defeated. It was a system that had worked when conflicts were smaller, more personal affairs between noble houses. The human fleet had just defeated an entire armada through coordinated strikes, electronic warfare, and what the Zephyrians would undoubtedly call dishonorable tactics. But the legal reality remained: Marcus had personally disabled the flagship's command systems and forced its surrender. Under galactic law, that made him the victor in single combat against its commander. Which made Princess Lyralii his prize. The docking bay of the Celestial Wind was a marvel of alien engineering, even in its damaged state. Crystalline support stretched upward like frozen lightning, and bioluminescent panels provided an ethereal blue glow that made everything feel underwater. Human Marines had established a secure perimeter, their bulky armor and kinetic weapons looking crude and primitive against the flowing organic architecture. Captain Chen, Lieutenant Rodriguez approached with a crisp salute. The prisoners are secured in the main conference chamber. The princess insisted on speaking with the commanding officer. Marcus nodded, following Rodriguez through corridors that seemed grown rather than built. Zephyrian technology blurred the line between biology and mechanics in ways that still made human engineers uncomfortable. The walls pulsed with a faint heartbeat rhythm, and the air carried a sweet, ozone-like scent. The conference chamber doors parted with a whisper, revealing a space that could have doubled as a cathedral. The ceiling arched impossibly high, supported by what looked like living bone, and holographic displays showed star charts that shifted like schools of fish. At the center of the room, surrounded by human guards, sat the Zephyrian prisoners. Princess Lyralii was not what Marcus had expected. The intelligence briefings had described her as a tactical genius, a warrior princess who led from the front and inspired fanatical loyalty in her troops. They had mentioned her physical description in clinical terms: typical Zephyrian physiology, approximately 2 meters tall, dual cardiac system, enhanced reflexes. They hadn't mentioned that she would be beautiful in a way that made humans question their own evolution. Lyralii stood as Marcus entered, and he found himself fighting not to stare. Her skin had the faint iridescent quality common to her species, shifting between silver and pale blue depending on the angle of light. Her hair was the color of starlight, literally each strand seemed to contain tiny points of illumination that moved with her breathing. Her eyes were large, violet, and currently fixed on him with an intensity that made him feel like a specimen under a microscope. She wore the formal uniform of a Zephyrian fleet commander, but even the military cut couldn't disguise the fact that Zephyrian physiology was built for both power and grace. She moved like water given form, each gesture economical and precise. "Captain Chen," she said, and her voice was like music played on instruments humans hadn't invented yet. "I am Princess Lyralii, 7th Fleet Commander of the Zephyrian Empire, daughter of Emperor Valdris, keeper of the Crystal Throne." She paused, and something flickered across her expression. "And, according to the laws my people have honored for 3 millennia, I am now your prize." Marcus felt his mouth go dry. Around the chamber, the other Zephyrian prisoners watched the exchange with expressions ranging from resignation to barely contained rage. They all knew what this moment meant. "Your Highness," Marcus began, then stopped. What was the protocol here? Human military doctrine covered prisoner treatment under the Geneva Convention and its galactic amendments, but those were written with the assumption that captured enemies remained prisoners, not property. "I understand this is uncomfortable for your kind," Lyralii continued, interpreting his hesitation. "Humans prefer to pretend that war is civilized, that victory comes without cost or consequence. But the galaxy operates under older laws. You defeated me in combat. You scattered my fleet. You have earned the right to claim what is yours." She stepped closer, and Marcus caught a scent like rain on summer grass. "The question is, Captain Chen, what will you do with your prize?" The chamber fell silent except for the subtle background hum of alien technology. Marcus was acutely aware that his next words would echo across the galaxy. Already, news of the battle would be spreading through hyperspace communication networks. The defeat of a Zephyrian fleet by human forces would send shockwaves through every civilized system. But how he handled this moment would determine whether humanity was seen as just another conquering species or something different entirely. "The law says you're my prize," Marcus said carefully. "But I didn't come here to collect trophies." Something shifted in Lyralii's expression. For just a moment, the mask of royal composure slipped, and Marcus saw something that might have been surprise. "Then, why did you come, Captain?" "To end a war," Marcus replied. "Your empire has been expanding into human space for the past decade. We've lost colonies, trade routes, entire star systems. This battle wasn't about conquest. It was about survival." Lyralii tilted her head, studying him. "And yet you won. The mighty 7th Fleet lies in ruin around us. By any measure, this was conquest." "Maybe," Marcus admitted. "But what happens next is still up to us." The princess moved to one of the chamber's massive windows, gazing out at the debris field where both human and Zephyrian ships floated in final silence. "You speak of choice, Captain, but the law is clear. I am bound to you until you release me or until one of us dies." "That is not a choice, it is fact." Marcus joined her at the window. Up close, he could see that her iridescent skin showed patterns when the light hit it right, like circuit boards made of living tissue. Another reminder that despite their similarities, humans and Zephyrians were fundamentally different species. "The law says you're bound to me," Marcus said. "But it doesn't say what that has to mean." "Explain." "In human culture, we have a concept called parole. When we capture enemy officers, we can release them on their promise not to fight against us again. They return home with honor intact. Lyralii turned to face him fully. You would release me? I would. But, first, I want to understand something. You're not just a princess, you're a fleet commander. Your people trust you, follow you. If I release you on parole, what happens next? The question hung in the air between them. Marcus could see her mind working, calculating possibilities and consequences. When she spoke again, her voice was different, less formal, more thoughtful. If you release me, I return to my father's court. I report the defeat of my fleet and submit to judgment for my failure. Most likely, I am stripped of command and exiled to one of our agricultural worlds. And the war continues. The war continues, she agreed. Other commanders will take my place. The Empire has many fleets, Captain Chen. Today's victory will not end this conflict. Marcus nodded. He had expected as much. The Zephyrian Empire controlled hundreds of star systems and commanded resources that dwarfed humanity's entire industrial capacity. Winning one battle, even a significant one, wouldn't stop their expansion. But there's another option, he said. Lyralii's violet eyes narrowed. Which is? You come with me. Not as a prisoner, not as a trophy, but as something else entirely. You help me understand your people, their tactics, their culture. In return, I help you understand mine. You speak of collaboration. That would make me a traitor. Marcus shook his head. Not a traitor. A bridge. The word seemed to resonate with her. She moved away from the window, pacing the length of the chamber while the other prisoners watched in tense silence. Marcus could practically hear her thoughts churning. You realize, she said finally, that what you propose has never been attempted. No royal of the Empire has ever served alongside former enemies. Maybe it's time for a first. Lyralii stopped pacing and turned to face him directly. And if I refuse? If I demand to be treated as a traditional prize? Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Traditional treatment of prizes varied from culture to culture, but none of the options were pleasant. Some species kept their prizes as slaves. Others used them as symbols of dominance. A few simply executed them to prevent future problems. Then, I guess we'll have to figure that out, Marcus said. But I'd rather find a third option. The princess studied his face for a long moment, as if searching for some sign of deception or hidden motive. Finally, she spoke. Captain Chen, are you familiar with the Zephyrian concept of kathara? Marcus shook his head. It translates roughly to honored debt. When one being saves the life of another, or grants them a gift of extraordinary value, a kathara is created. The debt must be repaid, but the nature of that repayment is determined by the one who holds the debt. She paused, her expression becoming more formal again. By offering me a choice when you could have simply claimed your rights, you have created a kathara. I am in your debt, Captain, not because the law demands it, but because honor demands it. Marcus felt like he was navigating a minefield of alien cultural nuances. What does that mean, practically? It means that I will accompany you, not as your prize, but as your debtor. I will provide you with whatever knowledge and assistance you require, within the bounds of honor. In return. She smiled, and the expression transformed her entire face. In return, you will show me how humans think they can change the galaxy. The other Zephyrian prisoners erupted in shocked murmurs, speaking rapidly in their own language. Marcus caught a few words. Betrayal and madness were apparently similar in most galactic tongues. Lyralii silenced them with a gesture, then spoke in Zephyrian. Her tone was commanding, imperial, and, when she finished, the protests died away. I told them, she said to Marcus, that sometimes the greatest service to one's people comes from understanding one's enemies. Marcus extended his hand, a human gesture he hoped wouldn't offend alien sensibilities. Partners, then? Lyralii looked at his outstretched hand for a moment, then grasped it with her own. Her skin was surprisingly warm, and he could feel a faint electrical sensation, like touching a live wire. Partners, she agreed. Though I suspect you have no idea what you've just committed yourself to, Captain Chen. As their hands separated, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he had just changed the course of more than just this war. Looking at the princess, no, at his new ally, he wondered if he had just made the smartest decision of his career, or the most catastrophic mistake in human history. Outside the chamber windows, human and Zephyrian ships continued their eternal dance among the stars, unaware that everything had just changed. The human vessel Indomitable was everything Princess Lyralii had expected from intelligence reports, and nothing like what she had prepared herself for emotionally. Where Zephyrian ships grew from living crystal and flowed like organisms through space, the human cruiser was all angles and harsh lines, built for function rather than beauty. The corridors were narrow, utilitarian, lit by harsh white lights that made everything look clinical and cold. And, yet, as she followed Captain Chen through the ship's maze of passages, Lyralii found herself increasingly fascinated by the differences. Your crew seems relaxed, she observed, noting how human sailors moved through the corridors with casual efficiency. On Zephyrian vessels, every movement was a ritual, every interaction governed by centuries of protocol. Here, she watched a junior technician stop his commanding officer to share what appeared to be a joke, both of them laughing before continuing their duties. We don't have the same hierarchical structure as your people, Marcus explained, pausing to acknowledge the salutes of passing crew members. Respect for rank is important, but we found that rigid formality can actually impede effectiveness in combat situations. Lyralii absorbed this information, filing it away with the dozens of other observations she'd made in her first hour aboard the ship. The human's casual approach to authority might seem chaotic to Zephyrian sensibilities, but she could see the underlying logic. In the heat of battle, when milliseconds mattered, wasting time on elaborate courtesies could mean the difference between victory and death. They reached what Marcus called the strategy room, a space that would have been unremarkable on any human vessel but struck Lyralii as revolutionary in its implications. Multiple officers sat around a large table, holographic displays showing star charts, ship movements, and tactical analyses. What made it revolutionary was that these officers represented multiple ranks and specializations, all contributing to the discussion as equals. Captain, a young lieutenant stood as they entered. We finished analyzing the battle data from Kepler 442. The preliminary results are interesting. Marcus gestured for Lyralii to take a seat at the table. Several of the human officers shifted uncomfortably, having the enemy's former fleet commander participate in their tactical briefing clearly violated every protocol they knew. But Marcus had made his decision clear to the crew during their transit: the princess was to be treated as a strategic consultant, not a prisoner. What did you find, Lieutenant Park? Marcus asked, settling into his own chair. The young officer activated the holographic display, showing a three-dimensional recreation of the recent battle. Ships moved like bright dots through space, their weapons' fire represented by thin lines of light. To Lyralii's eyes, it looked like a deadly dance performed by stars themselves. The Zephyrian formations were textbook perfect, Park began, highlighting the alien fleet's movements. Their coordination was flawless, their firing solutions optimal, their tactical responses exactly what our simulations predicted. But? Marcus prompted. But, that's exactly why we won. Park switched the display to show human ship movements. Where the Zephyrian fleet had moved in elegant, coordinated patterns, the human vessels seemed to dart and weave chaotically. They fought by the book. We threw the book away. Lyralii leaned forward, studying the recreation with professional interest. Your movements appear random, she said. No coordination, no overall strategy. From a tactical standpoint, it should have been a massacre. Commander Sarah Hayes, the Indomitable's tactical officer, smiled grimly. That's what your people thought too. But there was a strategy, it just wasn't one that appears in any military academy textbook. The display zoomed in on a specific sequence, showing 3 human destroyers breaking formation to attack what appeared to be empty space. We call it controlled chaos, Hayes continued. Every ship has individual initiative to break from the plan when opportunities arise. What looks like disorder is actually multiple mini-strategies happening simultaneously. Impossible, Lyralii said immediately, then caught herself. She was no longer a Zephyrian fleet commander arguing with enemies, she was a consultant trying to understand a new paradigm. I mean, such tactics would require unprecedented coordination between individual ship commanders. The communication requirements alone actually require less communication, not more, Marcus interrupted. Instead of every ship waiting for orders from a central command, each captain makes decisions based on the local tactical situation. It's faster and more adaptable. Lyralii stared at the holographic battle, her mind reeling. Everything she knew about military strategy suggested that such tactics should fail catastrophically. Individual commanders making unilateral decisions should result in friendly fire incidents, wasted opportunities, and complete breakdown of unit cohesion. And, yet, the evidence was right in front of her. The human fleet had destroyed a Zephyrian force that outnumbered them 2-1. How do you prevent your ships from interfering with each other? She asked. Training, said Captain Torres, the ship's executive officer. Our officers spend years learning to think independently while still working toward common objectives. It's not about following orders, it's about understanding the mission so completely that you can improvise when necessary. Like jazz, added Lieutenant Park, earning confused looks from the room's aliens. It's a human musical form. Musicians improvise around a common theme, creating something unique each time while still maintaining overall harmony. Lyralii had no idea what jazz was, but the metaphor was intriguing. You fight like musicians? We fight like humans, Marcus said simply. Which means we adapt. Over the following hours, Lyralii found herself drawn into discussions that challenged every assumption she'd held about warfare and command structure. The humans didn't just allow debate among their officers, they encouraged it. Disagreement was seen as valuable input rather than insubordination. When Captain Torres questioned Marcus's decision to bring Lyralii aboard, she expected to witness a disciplinary action. Instead, she watched Marcus explain his reasoning while inviting further challenges. The discussion became heated at times, with voices raised and strong opinions expressed, but no one was punished for their dissent. Your people argue constantly, she observed during a brief break in the briefings. Marcus laughed. You should see our political debates. But, yes, we argue. We call it discussion or healthy debate. The idea is that better solutions emerge when different perspectives compete. In the Empire, such behavior would be seen as undisciplined. Disloyal. Maybe. But, loyalty without thought is just another form of slavery. The words hit Lyralii like a physical blow. She'd spent her entire life in service to the Empire, following orders and traditions without question. The idea that such service might be slavery rather than honor was difficult to process. Tell me about your empire, Marcus said, perhaps sensing her discomfort. Not the official history or the propaganda, but what it's really like for someone like you. Lyralii considered how to answer. The truth was complex, layered with centuries of tradition and social expectations that would be difficult for humans to understand. I am the daughter of the Emperor, she began slowly. From birth, my life was planned in service to the Empire. I was educated by the finest tutors, trained by the greatest military minds, prepared to lead fleets and expand our territory. Every day of my existence has been devoted to making the Empire stronger and larger. That sounds lonely, observed Commander Hayes. Lyralii paused. Lonely? The concept hadn't occurred to her. I have purpose, she said. My people depend on me to protect them, to expand their territory, to bring order to the galaxy. But what do you want? Marcus asked. The question was so alien that Lyralii almost didn't understand it. I want to serve the Empire. No, I mean, what do you personally want? If you could choose any life, any purpose, what would make you happy? Happy. Another human concept that didn't translate well. Zephyrians spoke of duty, honor, fulfillment of purpose. Personal happiness was selfish. Unimportant. I don't understand the question, she admitted. The room fell silent. Lyralii could see the humans exchanging glances, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. Was she revealing too much of her people's weakness? Or too much of her own? Let me try a different approach, Marcus said gently. When you're not on duty, what do you do? I study tactical manuals. Review fleet reports. Analyze potential threats to the Empire. What about for fun? Another untranslatable concept. Fun? Entertainment. Pleasure. Things you do just because you enjoy them. Lyralii searched her memory for activities that fit that description and came up empty. Her entire life had been structured around duty and service. Even her rest periods were scheduled to maximize her effectiveness as a military commander. "I don't think I have fun," she said quietly. The admission seemed to shock the humans more than any tactical revelation could have. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Your empire controls hundreds of systems," he said. "But it's produced people who don't know how to be happy. What's the point of all that power if no one enjoys it?" "The point is survival," Lyralii replied, falling back on familiar doctrine. "The galaxy is dangerous. Only the strong survive, and strength comes through unity, discipline, and constant expansion." "But you're not just surviving," Lieutenant Park pointed out. "You're conquering. Taking systems that belong to other species, forcing them to serve your empire." "Why?" The answer seemed obvious to Lyralii. "Because otherwise they would conquer us." "Would they? How many of the species your empire has absorbed actually posed a threat?" Lyralii opened her mouth to provide examples, then stopped. The truth was that most of the empire's expansion had been into systems occupied by species that posed no military threat whatsoever. Agricultural worlds, research colonies, trading posts, the empire absorbed them not out of necessity but out of policy. "The doctrine is clear," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Expansion prevents stagnation. Growth ensures survival." "Whose doctrine?" Marcus asked. "Who decided that endless expansion was necessary?" "The Founding Council. Our greatest leaders, 3,000 years ago, established the principles that guide us." 3,000 years, Commander Hayes repeated. "And, in all that time, no one has questioned whether those principles still make sense?" Questioning the Founding Council's wisdom would be. Lyralii searched for the right word. Heretical. The humans exchanged more glances. Marcus stood and walked to the room's viewport, looking out at the stars beyond. "Your Highness," he said, using her formal title for the first time since their conversation began. "What would happen if someone in your empire proposed a different approach? If they suggested that maybe constant expansion wasn't necessary anymore?" "They would be arrested for sedition. Possibly executed, depending on their rank and influence." "And if someone suggested that individual Zephyrians should be allowed to pursue their own happiness instead of serving the Empire's needs?" "The same." Marcus turned back to face her. "So your Empire maintains control through fear. People obey not because they believe in the system, but because they're afraid of the consequences of rebellion." "That's not." Lyralii began, then stopped. Was that true? Did her people serve the Empire out of love and loyalty, or out of fear? She thought about her own life, her own choices. Had she ever really chosen her path, or had she simply followed the only route available to her? Would she have dared to question the Empire's policies even if doubts had occurred to her? "You're suggesting that my entire civilization is built on a lie," she said quietly. "I'm suggesting that maybe it's built on assumptions that are no longer valid." If they ever were. The conversation was interrupted by an alert tone. Captain Torres checked his personal communicator and frowned. "Sir, we have an incoming transmission from Earth Command. Priority Alpha." Marcus nodded. "Transfer it to the main screen." The holographic display shifted to show a middle-aged woman in the uniform of an Earth Defense Corps admiral. Her expression was grim, and she didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Captain Chen, Admiral Rodriguez speaking. I'll get straight to the point. The Zephyrian Empire has declared Princess Lyralii dead and branded you a war criminal for her alleged murder. They're demanding your immediate surrender and the return of her body." Lyralii felt her blood turn cold. Dead? But she was sitting right here, obviously alive and unharmed. They're claiming you executed her in violation of galactic law, the Admiral continued. Emperor Valdris has issued what he calls a grief decree. He's mobilizing the entire Imperial fleet to avenge his daughter's death. Marcus looked at Lyralii, his expression carefully neutral. How many ships are we talking about, Admiral? Best estimates put it at over 3,000 vessels across 12 fleets. Captain, they're not just coming for you, they're coming for Earth. The Emperor has declared humanity an enemy of the Empire and sworn to wipe us out completely. The transmission ended, leaving the strategy room in stunned silence. 3,000 ships. Lyralii's mind automatically began calculating the implications. The human fleet numbered fewer than 500 vessels total, and most of those were smaller craft designed for system defense rather than fleet engagements. Your Highness, Marcus said carefully, is there any way to convince your father that you're alive? Lyralii shook her head slowly. He wouldn't believe it. Once an imperial decree has been issued, acknowledging error would be seen as weakness. My father would rather lose the war than admit he was wrong about my death. Then, we have a problem, Commander Hayes said. Even if we could defeat one or two fleets, we can't fight the entire Empire. Humanity doesn't have the resources. Lyralii stood abruptly, pacing to the viewport where she could see the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, her father was gathering the largest military force in galactic history to avenge her death. The irony was bitter. In trying to save her people from destruction, she had instead guaranteed it. But, as she watched the stars wheel past, another thought occurred to her. Her father's grief decree wasn't just a declaration of war, it was also an opportunity. For the first time in 3 millennia, the Empire's military forces would be concentrated in a single theater. If someone could find a way to defeat that force. Captain Chen, she said, turning back to face the room. You've shown me that there are alternatives to the Empire's way of thinking. Perhaps it's time I showed you alternatives to the Empire's way of fighting. Marcus raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I mean that you're right about one thing: endless expansion through conquest is unsustainable. The Empire has grown too large, too complex, too dependent on fear to maintain control. It's become rigid, predictable. She smiled, and, for the first time since boarding the human ship, the expression felt genuine. And rigid things break when enough pressure is applied. You want to help us fight your own people? I want to help you save both our peoples. The Empire as it exists now will destroy itself eventually, either through overextension or internal rebellion. But that process could take centuries and cost billions of lives. Lyralii moved back to the table, her mind already racing with possibilities. Better to provide a controlled collapse now, while we can still shape what comes after. Lieutenant Park looked skeptical. You're talking about overthrowing your own civilization. I'm talking about saving it, Lyralii corrected. The Empire's people aren't evil, Captain Chen. They're trapped in a system that demands constant expansion and conquest to justify its own existence. Given a choice, most of them would prefer peace. But they don't have a choice, Marcus said, understanding dawning in his eyes. Because questioning the system means death. Exactly. So we give them a choice by removing the system entirely. Commander Hayes leaned forward. And replace it with what? Lyralii smiled again, and this time the expression felt revolutionary. That, Commander, is what we're going to figure out together. The hidden base on Meridian 6 had been built inside a hollowed-out asteroid, its chambers carved from living rock and shielded from detection by layers of exotic matter that bent sensor readings around it like water flowing around a stone. 6 months ago, it had housed a small research outpost studying dark matter interactions. Now it served as the headquarters for the most unlikely alliance in galactic history. Princess Lyralii stood before a massive holographic display showing the disposition of Imperial fleets across known space, her fingers dancing over control surfaces as she highlighted force concentrations and supply lines. To her left, Captain Marcus Chen reviewed intelligence reports from human agents throughout the galaxy. To her right, Commander Zarathul of the recently liberated Chronari system studied logistics projections with the intensity of someone whose people's freedom depended on getting the numbers right. The past 3 months had transformed everything Lyralii thought she knew about warfare. The 7th and 9th fleets have converged at Altair Station, she announced to the assembled coalition leaders. My father is concentrating his forces for a massive strike, just as we predicted. How massive? Asked General Morrison, the grizzled veteran who commanded the human ground forces. Lyralii manipulated the display, highlighting the Imperial formation. 4,700 ships. The largest single fleet in recorded history. A low whistle came from Captain Vexani of the Solari Resistance. Her people had been fighting Imperial occupation for decades with little success, but the new alliance offered hope they'd never dared imagine. That's nearly a third of the Empire's total fleet strength, Vexani observed. If we could somehow destroy that force. We can't, Marcus said firmly. Even with all our allies, we're outnumbered 10-1. A direct confrontation would be suicide. Lyralii nodded agreement. But we don't need to destroy them. We need to convince them. She touched another control, and the display shifted to show communication networks throughout Imperial space. Red lines indicated normal Imperial communication channels, while green ones represented the underground network that had been growing since news of their alliance began spreading. Every Imperial world has received our broadcasts, she continued. Citizens across the Empire know that I'm alive, that I chose to work with humanity rather than against it. More importantly, they know why. The broadcasts had been Lyralii's idea, a direct challenge to Imperial propaganda that painted humans as savage conquerors. Instead of hiding their alliance, they had made it public, explaining their goals and inviting others to join them. The response had been explosive. On worlds throughout the Empire, citizens had begun asking questions that had been forbidden for centuries. Why was endless expansion necessary? Why were individual desires subordinated to Imperial will? Why were alternative viewpoints punished with death? The Empire's response had been swift and brutal. Public executions of seditionists had increased dramatically. Entire worlds had been placed under martial law. Communication networks had been severed or heavily monitored. But ideas, once planted, were impossible to completely suppress. The situation reports from our agents are encouraging, added Commander Elena Vasquez, who coordinated intelligence operations. 17 worlds have experienced significant civil unrest in the past month. 3 planetary governors have requested additional security forces. The Empire is fighting a war on 2 fronts now, against us, and against their own people. Lyralii felt a complex mix of emotions at that news. The growing rebellion meant their strategy was working, but it also meant that Zephyrians were dying in civil conflicts across the galaxy. Every death weighed on her conscience, even as she recognized the necessity. The question, said Dr. Sarah Kim, the coalition's chief strategist, is whether we can maintain momentum long enough to achieve critical mass. The Empire's security apparatus is adapting to the threat. Lyralii had been thinking about that problem for weeks. The Empire's strength came from its unity, its ability to coordinate vast resources across hundreds of star systems. But that same centralization was also its weakness. Show the supply chain analysis, she instructed. The display shifted again, this time showing the complex web of trade routes and supply lines that kept the Empire functioning. Food from agricultural worlds, minerals from mining colonies, manufactured goods from industrial centers, it all flowed through a carefully orchestrated network that had taken centuries to build. The Empire's fleet concentration creates an opportunity, Lyralii explained. With so many ships gathered for the strike against Earth, the security forces in outlying systems are spread thin. If we could coordinate simultaneous actions across multiple supply nodes. A logistical rebellion, Marcus said, understanding immediately. Instead of fighting the fleet directly, we target the infrastructure that keeps it operational. Commander Zarathul leaned forward, her six-eyed gaze fixed on the display. The Chronari shipyards at Kepler 186 produce 40% of the Empire's fighter craft. If those facilities were to suffer technical difficulties, it would significantly impact their ability to replace losses. Captain Vexani smiled grimly. The Solari controls several asteroid mining operations. A temporary suspension of mineral shipments could create shortages across multiple sectors. Dr. Kim was already running calculations. If we could disrupt even 30% of the supply network simultaneously, the effects would cascade throughout the Empire. But the timing would have to be perfect. Lyralii nodded. Which brings us to the key question: when do we strike? The room fell silent as everyone contemplated the implications. They were discussing actions that would effectively declare war on the most powerful civilization in the galaxy. There would be no going back after this moment. Intelligence suggests the Imperial fleet will be ready to move against Earth within 2 weeks, reported Commander Vasquez. Our window of opportunity is closing. Marcus stood and walked to the display, studying the vast array of Imperial forces. Even if we succeed in disrupting their supply lines, we still need to deal with the fleet itself. 4,000 ships is still 4,000 ships. Actually, Lyralii said quietly, I may have a solution for that as well. All eyes turned to her. She had been developing this idea for weeks, but sharing it meant crossing a line she could never uncross. The Imperial command structure is more centralized than you realize. Every major tactical decision flows through my father's flagship, the Emperor's will. It's a symbol of Imperial power, but it's also a single point of failure. You want to target your father's ship directly? Asked General Morrison. More than that, Lyralii replied. I want to board it. The suggestion was met with stunned silence. Marcus was the first to find his voice. That would be suicide. The Emperor's will is the most heavily defended ship in the galaxy. For an attack from outside, yes. But not for someone who knows its internal layout, its security protocols, its crew rotation schedules. Lyralii met his gaze steadily. I helped design many of those systems. I know how to circumvent them. Captain Vexani shook her head. Even if you could board the ship undetected, what then? You can't single-handedly disable a dreadnought. I don't need to disable it. I need to reach the command center and broadcast a message to the entire fleet. Not through official channels, but through the emergency communication system that reaches every ship simultaneously. Dr. Kim's eyes widened as she understood the plan. You want to address the fleet directly. To tell them the truth about what's happening. More than that. I want to give them a choice. Lyralii turned back to the display, highlighting the massive Imperial formation. Most of those crews are good people serving what they believe is a just cause. They follow orders because they've never been given an alternative. And if they refuse to listen, asked Commander Zarathul. Then, we fight, Marcus said grimly. But at least we'll know we tried. Over the next hour, they refined the plan. It would require perfect timing and coordination across dozens of star systems. The supply line disruptions would need to happen simultaneously, creating maximum chaos and confusion. The boarding of the Emperor's will would need to occur during the confusion, when security forces were focused on external threats rather than internal ones. The risks were enormous. If any element of the plan failed, the consequences would be catastrophic not just for the Alliance but for every world that had supported them. I want to be clear about something, Lyralii said as the meeting began to wind down. What we're proposing isn't just military action. We're attempting to change the fundamental nature of galactic civilization. The Empire has maintained order for 3,000 years through strength and fear. If we succeed, we'll need something to replace it. What did you have in mind? Asked Marcus. Lyralii smiled, remembering the conversations that had led her to this moment. Something humans call democracy. Government by consent rather than conquest. The radical idea that people should have a say in how they're governed. General Morrison laughed, but not mockingly. You realize that most of the galaxy's species have never experienced anything like that? The transition would be chaotic. Probably, Lyralii agreed. But chaos is better than tyranny. And, eventually, people learn to govern themselves if given the chance. As the meeting dispersed, Marcus approached her privately. Are you sure about this? Once we begin, there's no guarantee we can control what happens next. Lyralii looked around the command center, watching humans and aliens work together with an efficiency that would have been impossible under Imperial doctrine. They argued, debated, challenged each other's assumptions, and somehow arrived at better solutions than any single leader could have developed alone. Captain Chen, she said, 6 months ago, I believed that order required absolute authority. That freedom was dangerous because it led to chaos. You've shown me that the opposite is true, that real order comes from people choosing to work together, not from fear of punishment. She paused, thinking about the family and friends she would soon be fighting against. My people deserve that choice, even if offering it costs me everything I've ever known. Marcus nodded slowly. Then, we move in 72 hours. May whatever gods are listening help us all. As he walked away, Lyralii remained at the display, watching the movements of Imperial fleets across the galaxy. Soon, those ships would face a choice between the certainty of the past and the uncertainty of the future. She could only hope that enough of them would choose courage over comfort, freedom over security. The revolution was about to begin, and there would be no turning back. 3 days later, the first supply depot on Rigel 7 went silent without explanation. An hour after that, mining operations in the Vega system reported technical difficulties that would require weeks to resolve. By the time Imperial Command realized they were facing a coordinated insurgency, 17 critical supply nodes across the Empire had ceased operations. The message was clear: the old order was ending, whether the Empire chose to accept it or not. And, somewhere in the depths of space, a small ship carrying Princess Lyralii and a hand-picked team of allies accelerated toward a rendezvous with destiny aboard the most powerful vessel in the galaxy. The Emperor's will was more than a ship, it was a symbol of imperial power made manifest, a crystalline leviathan 3 kilometers long that could have housed a small city within its biomechanical hull. Its surface rippled with living energy conduits that pulsed like arteries carrying the lifeblood of Empire, and its central spire reached toward the stars like a cathedral spear aimed at the heart of heaven itself. Princess Lyralii pressed herself against the observation port of their stolen Imperial courier vessel, watching her father's flagship grow larger as they approached. Beside her, Captain Marcus Chen checked their approach vector one final time, his human features tense with concentration. "Remember," Lyralii said quietly, "once we're aboard, we have maybe 20 minutes before security realizes something is wrong. After that, all of my father's paranoia comes into play." Marcus nodded, adjusting the Imperial uniform he'd been wearing for the past week. The transformation had been remarkable. Human genetic therapy techniques combined with Zephyrian biotechnology had temporarily altered his appearance enough to pass casual inspection. To any observer, he would appear to be Commander Veltar, a mid-ranking Imperial officer returning from a diplomatic mission. "And, you're certain about the access codes?" he asked. "As certain as I can be. My father changes his personal codes monthly, but the ship's infrastructure systems use rotating keys that I helped design. Unless they've completely rebuilt the security architecture in the past year." "A lot of a less in that sentence," observed Lieutenant Sarah Park, who had volunteered for what they all knew was likely a suicide mission. Like Marcus, she had undergone genetic modification to appear Zephyrian, though her nervous energy was purely human. "There's a lot of a less in this entire plan," Lyralii replied. "But sometimes the impossible is the only option left." Their ship shuddered slightly as the Emperor's will's docking bay tractor beams engaged, drawing them into the massive vessel's belly. Around them, the familiar blue-white glow of Zephyrian technology washed over the courier's hull like a blessing from ancient gods. Lyralii felt a wave of unexpected nostalgia as they entered the docking bay. She had grown up on ships like this, learning to walk in corridors lined with living crystal, breathing air that tasted of ozone and possibility. The Empire might be corrupt, but its aesthetic beauty was undeniable. "Stay close," she murmured as the airlock cycled. "Speak only if directly addressed, and, then, keep your answers brief. Imperial protocol favors efficiency over conversation." The docking bay was a cathedral of functional art, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into shadows while bioluminescent guides marked safe pathways through the organized chaos of military logistics. Dozens of smaller vessels rested in individual berths, their crews performing maintenance and resupply operations with the precision of a dance perfected over centuries. Nobody paid attention to 3 more Imperial officers disembarking from a routine courier run. Lyralii led them through passages that grew more ornate as they approached the ship's command sections. Here, the walls themselves were works of art, crystalline formations that had been guided rather than carved, creating flowing patterns that suggested movement even in stillness. Holographic displays floated in alcoves, showing star charts and tactical data that painted the galaxy in shades of conquest and control. They passed other crew members, engineers, technicians, junior officers, all moving with the purposeful efficiency that characterized Imperial service. To Lyraliai's trained eye, however, she could see signs of strain. Conversations were quieter than normal, expressions more guarded. The rebellion's broadcasts had reached even here, to the heart of Imperial power. "Princess?" Lyraliai turned, her blood chilling as she recognized the voice. Commander Kethran of Imperial Security stood in a side corridor, his four eyes fixed on her with unmistakable recognition. "Commander," she said carefully, falling back on years of royal protocol. "I wasn't aware you were serving aboard my father's flagship." Kethran stepped closer, his gaze shifting to Marcus and Park. "Your Highness, forgive me, but you were declared dead months ago. Your father mourns your loss even now." "Reports of my death," Lyraliai said with a slight smile, "have been greatly exaggerated." The security officer's expression shifted from confusion to alarm as he processed the implications. "Your Highness, if you're alive, then, the war against humanity is based on a lie." "Yes." Lyraliai stepped closer, using her royal presence like a weapon. "Commander, I need to speak with my father immediately. Will you escort us to the command center?" Kethran hesitated, his trained paranoia warring with ingrained deference to royal authority. "Your Highness, protocol requires that I verify your identity and report your presence to." "Commander," Lyraliai interrupted, her voice carrying the full weight of Imperial authority. "Are you questioning my orders?" The challenge hung in the air between them. In Imperial culture, direct disobedience to royal commands was a capital offense, but so was allowing security breaches to reach the command center. Kethran was caught between equally dangerous choices. "Of course not, Your Highness. But perhaps we should use the secondary route to avoid complications." Lyraliai nodded graciously. "An excellent suggestion, Commander. Lead the way." As they followed Kethran through less traveled corridors, Marcus leaned close to whisper, "He's going to alert security the moment we're out of sight." "I know," Lyraliai replied quietly. "But this gets us closer to our objective. Sometimes you have to accept tactical losses to achieve strategic goals." The secondary route took them through sections of the ship that Lyraliai remembered from her childhood: maintenance areas, storage bays, the hidden passages that every royal child learned to navigate during games of exploration. The familiarity was both comforting and heartbreaking. This ship had been her home once, a place of safety and wonder. Now it was the epicenter of a war that could destroy everything she had come to believe in. They reached a service elevator that would take them to the command deck, but, as the doors opened, Lyraliai saw armed security officers waiting inside. Kethran had managed to send a silent alert after all. "Your Highness," he said apologetically, "I'm afraid I must ask you to submit to identity verification before." Lyraliai moved faster than human reflexes could follow, her hand closing on Kethran's weapon before he could react. Park and Marcus flanked the security officers in the elevator, their own concealed weapons suddenly visible. "I'm sorry, Commander," Lyraliai said genuinely. "But we don't have time for protocol." The next few minutes passed in a blur of controlled violence. Imperial security forces were elite, but they had been trained to protect against external threats, not to fight a former fleet commander who knew all their tactics and procedures. Within moments, the security team was unconscious and secured, their uniforms redistributed among Lyraliai's group. "That's Tornet," Marcus said grimly as they stepped into the elevator. "The whole ship will be on alert within minutes." "Then, we'd better move fast," Lyraliai replied, pressing the control for the command deck. The elevator rose through the ship's central core, passing level after level of operational centers and crew quarters. Lyraliai watched the indicators climb, remembering other journeys on this same elevator: as a child visiting her father, as a young officer reporting for duty, as a fleet commander receiving her first major assignment. She wondered if this would be the last time she ever made this journey. The command deck of the Emperor's Will was the nerve center of the largest military force in galactic history. Holographic displays showed the positions of thousands of ships, tactical analyses of enemy movements, supply status reports from across the Empire. Officers moved between stations with practiced efficiency, their voices blending into a symphony of organized authority. At the center of it all sat Emperor Valdris, Lyraliai's father, in the command throne that had been crafted from a single massive crystal and enhanced with biotechnology that linked him directly to every ship in the fleet. He was older than she remembered, his features showing the strain of recent months, but his presence still commanded the room with absolute authority.
"Father," Lyraliai said, stepping onto the command deck.
The reaction was instantaneous. Every officer on the deck turned to stare, their faces registering shock, disbelief, and, in some cases, hope. The Emperor himself went rigid, his hands gripping the arms of his throne as his violet eyes fixed on his daughter.
"Impossible," he breathed.
"You're dead. I saw the reports.
The humans murdered you." "I'm very much alive, Father. And the humans didn't murder me, they freed me."
Emperor Valdris rose slowly from his throne, his gaze shifting to Marcus and Park.
"Guards! Arrest these humans immediately."
But the expected response didn't come. The Imperial guards stationed around the command center hesitated, their weapons half drawn but not quite aimed. They had spent months preparing to avenge their princess's death, only to see her standing before them apparently unharmed.
"Father, please," Lyraliai continued, stepping closer to the throne. "We need to talk. The war, the expansion, the way we've governed the galaxy, it's all wrong. The humans showed me that there's a better way."
"Better?" Valdris's voice carried 3 millennia of imperial authority.
"You speak of treason, daughter.
The Empire has brought order to the galaxy, ended the chaos of the ancient wars, created peace through strength."
"Created peace through fear," Lyraliai corrected. "Father, when was the last time any of our subjects chose to serve the Empire? When was the last time anyone was allowed to question our policies without facing execution?"
The Emperor's expression hardened.
"Questions lead to doubt. Doubt leads to weakness. Weakness leads to chaos. No, Father. Questions lead to better answers. Doubt leads to improvement."
What you call weakness is actually strength, the strength to admit when we're wrong and change course. Around the command center, officers listened to the exchange with growing amazement.
Never in Imperial history had anyone, even royalty, spoken to the Emperor with such directness.
"You sound like them," Valdris said with disgust.
"The humans have corrupted you with their democratic poison. Their chaos masquerading as freedom."
Lyraliai felt her heart break a little. This was the man who had taught her to read star charts, who had carried her on his shoulders through the palace gardens, who had been so proud when she earned her first fleet command. But he was also the man who had ordered the executions of billions in the name of imperial order.
"They haven't corrupted me, Father. They've educated me.
They've shown me that people can govern themselves if given the chance. That diversity of thought leads to better solutions.
That freedom isn't chaos, it's the foundation of real strength. Enough."
The Emperor's voice echoed through the command center. "You will return to your proper place, daughter, or you will share the fate of all traitors to the Empire."
"And what fate is that, Father? Death? For the crime of believing that our people deserve to choose their own destiny?"
Lyraliai moved to one of the communication consoles, her fingers dancing over controls she had learned to operate decades ago.
"Let me show you something."
The main display shifted, showing feeds from across the Empire.
Worlds in open rebellion, supply lines severed, entire systems declaring independence from Imperial control. But, more than that, it showed something unprecedented in Imperial history.
It showed Imperial citizens helping each other without orders, forming new governments based on consent rather than conquest, celebrating the freedom to make their own choices.
"This is what happens when people are given alternatives to fear," Lyraliai said. "They don't choose chaos. They choose hope."
Emperor Valdris stared at the display, his face showing the first cracks in a lifetime of absolute certainty. Around the command center, other officers watched with expressions ranging from horror to wonder. "You've destroyed everything," he whispered.
"No, Father. I've saved it. The Empire as we knew it was destroying itself through endless expansion and oppression.
This way, at least, our people have a chance to build something better."
Lyraliai activated the fleet-wide communication system, knowing that her words would reach every ship in the massive armada. This is Princess Lyralii of House Zephyr, addressing all Imperial forces.
I stand before you alive and unharmed, proof that much of what you've been told about this war is false.
The humans didn't murder me, they offered me a choice. The same choice I now offer to you.
On screens throughout the fleet, her image appeared, flanked by Marcus and Park, but clearly speaking of her own free will. You can continue to serve an empire built on fear and conquest, knowing that your children will inherit nothing but endless war. Or you can choose to build something new, a galaxy where different species work together as equals, where strength comes from cooperation rather than domination, where the future is shaped by hope rather than fear. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across the fleet, ship after ship began requesting permission to stand down, their crews choosing peace over war, cooperation over conquest.
But not all of them. Imperial Guard.
Emperor Valdris commanded, his voice cracking with fury.
Arrest the traitors. Execute them immediately.
Some of the guards moved to obey, but others hesitated, their loyalty torn between ancient conditioning and the evidence of their own eyes. The command center erupted into chaos as Imperial forces turned against each other, 3,000 years of absolute authority collapsing in real time.
In the confusion, Marcus grabbed Lyralii's arm. We need to go. Now.
But, as they turned toward the exit, they found their path blocked by Emperor Valdris himself, a ceremonial weapon in his hands and madness in his eyes.
You will not leave this ship, he said, his voice barely controlled. If I cannot have order, I will have revenge.
Lyralii looked at her father, seeing not the great emperor but a broken old man whose worldview was crumbling around him.
Father, it doesn't have to end this way.
You could still choose to lead the transition, to help build the future instead of fighting it.
Never, Valdris snarled. I would rather die than see the Empire corrupted by human weakness.
The weapon in his hands began to glow with lethal energy, and Lyralii realized that her father truly intended to kill her rather than accept the changes she represented. But, before he could fire, another voice cut through the chaos.
Stand down, Your Majesty. Commander Torval, the Emperor's own strategic advisor, stepped forward with his own weapon drawn.
Behind him, a dozen other senior officers formed a protective line between the Emperor and his daughter.
Commander?
Valdris gasped.
You dare betray me?
I dare serve my people instead of my pride, Torval replied firmly.
Your Majesty, the princess is right.
The Empire as we knew it is finished. We can either guide its transformation or watch it burn in civil war. The standoff stretched for long moments, the future of galactic civilization hanging in the balance. Finally, Emperor Valdris lowered his weapon, his shoulders sagging with defeat. I have failed, he whispered. 3,000 years of imperial tradition, and I have let it all crumble. Lyralii stepped forward, ignoring the risk, and placed her hand on her father's shoulder.
You haven't failed, father.
You've just discovered that even emperors can learn new things. As father and daughter embraced for what might be the last time, the transformation of the galaxy continued around them, hope spreading from ship to ship like wildfire among the stars. 1 year after the Battle of the Emperor's Will, the former imperial capital world of Zephyria Prime hummed with an energy that would have been unthinkable during 3 millennia of imperial rule. The crystal spires that had once housed only the nobility now served as meeting halls for representatives from hundreds of worlds, their chambers filled with voices speaking dozens of languages in spirited debate about the future of galactic civilization. Princess Lyralii, though she no longer used the title, stood at the observation deck of the new Galactic Assembly building, watching ships from across the known galaxy dock at the orbital platforms that surrounded the world. Human vessels with their angular efficiency, graceful Zephyrian bioships, the geometric perfection of Chronari craft, and dozens of other designs representing species that had finally been given a voice in their own governance.
Regrets, asked Marcus Chen, joining her at the viewport. He now served as Earth's primary representative to the Assembly, though his real role was as an advisor to the transition government that was slowly replacing imperial administration across former Empire territory.
Every day, Lyralii replied honestly.
But not about our choices. About the cost.
The transformation hadn't been bloodless. While most imperial forces had stood down after the Emperor's broadcast surrender, hardline factions had fought bitter campaigns across 17 star systems before finally accepting the new reality. Billions of beings were learning to navigate freedom after centuries of authoritarian rule, and the process was often chaotic, sometimes violent, always uncertain. But it was also miraculous. The latest reports from the agricultural worlds are encouraging, Marcus said, pulling up a holographic display. Food production is up 30% since they were allowed to choose their own crops and distribution methods.
Lyralii smiled.
It turns out that farmers know more about farming than imperial bureaucrats did.
Who could have predicted that?
They watched as a small Solari vessel docked at one of the platforms. Captain Vexani emerged, her delegation carrying proposals for a new inter-system trade agreement that would have been impossible under imperial rule. Where the Empire had controlled all commerce through centralized directives, the new confederation allowed worlds to negotiate directly with each other, creating economic relationships based on mutual benefit rather than imperial extraction.
How's your father adjusting? Marcus asked carefully. Lyralii's expression grew more complex. Former Emperor Valdris had surprised everyone by choosing exile rather than execution or imprisonment.
He now lived quietly on a small agricultural world, tending gardens and, according to reports, slowly coming to terms with the changes he had initially seen as civilization's end.
He sends letters occasionally.
They're thoughtful.
I think he's beginning to understand that freedom doesn't automatically lead to chaos. It just leads to different kinds of order. Below them, the assembly chambers were preparing for the day's main debate, whether to approve humanity's proposal for a joint exploration mission to the Andromeda Galaxy.
It was the kind of ambitious project that would have been impossible under imperial rule, requiring cooperation between species that had been enemies just months ago.
Nervous about the vote? Marcus asked.
Terrified, Lyralii admitted.
Not about whether it will pass, the preliminary counts look positive. But about what it means.
We're talking about reaching beyond our own galaxy, representing all our peoples to whatever we find out there.
Having second thoughts about nominating yourself to lead the mission? Lyralii turned from the viewport to face him.
Marcus, a year ago I was a princess whose entire life was planned for her. I had never made a meaningful choice, never questioned the system I served, never imagined alternatives to the only life I'd ever known.
Now I'm about to become an explorer, heading into completely unknown territory with a mixed crew of former enemies.
She paused, looking out at the bustling orbital traffic. If that's not the perfect metaphor for what we've all become, I don't know what is.
A soft chime indicated that the assembly session was beginning.
They made their way to the observation gallery, where representatives from across the galaxy were gathering to debate proposals that would have been unthinkable under imperial rule. The assembly chamber itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering, with sections designed to accommodate the environmental needs of different species. Aquatic delegates from the coral worlds debated with crystalline beings from the silicon systems, while mammalian species like humans and Zephyrians shared space with energy beings whose forms shifted like living aurora. The chair recognizes the delegate from Terra, announced Assembly Speaker Mordain, a former imperial governor who had become one of the most effective advocates for democratic process. Marcus rose from his seat, activating the translation matrix that would carry his words to every delegate in their own language.
Fellow representatives, 1 year ago most of our worlds were enemies, united only by imperial conquest.
Today, we gather as equals to discuss a project that will require the best efforts of all our peoples.
He gestured to the holographic display showing the proposed mission parameters.
The Andromeda Exploration Initiative represents more than scientific discovery.
It represents proof that former enemies can work together toward common goals. Delegate Zarathul from the Chronari systems raised an objection.
While the scientific merits are clear, the resource requirements are substantial.
Can the Confederation afford such an ambitious project when so many worlds are still rebuilding?
The debate that followed illustrated everything that had changed about galactic governance.
Instead of receiving orders from imperial bureaucrats, representatives engaged in genuine discussion about costs, benefits, and alternatives.
They disagreed, sometimes passionately, but they listened to each other and modified their positions based on evidence and argument. The chair recognizes the delegate from Zephyria Prime, Speaker Mordain announced. Lyralii stood, feeling the weight of history as hundreds of eyes turned to her. A year ago, her words would have carried the authority of imperial command. Today, they carried only the power of persuasion. Fellow delegates, she began, I want to address the concerns about resource allocation. But, first, I want to tell you about a conversation I had with my father before he entered exile. The chamber grew quiet. Former Emperor Valdris had become a complex symbol of both the old order's failures and the possibility of redemption. He asked me whether the chaos of freedom was really preferable to the order of empire. I told him that what we call chaos is actually the sound of billions of voices finally being heard. What we call disorder is actually the process of finding better ways to organize ourselves. She activated her own display, showing images from across the former empire, worlds developing new technologies, species collaborating on projects that crossed traditional boundaries, children from different races playing together without the fear that had defined relations between their parents.
The Andromeda mission isn't about the resources we'll spend. It's about the civilization we're becoming. A civilization that chooses exploration over conquest, cooperation over domination, hope over fear.
The vote, when it came, was overwhelming, 847 in favor, 23 opposed, 31 abstaining.
As representatives filed out of the chamber, Marcus joined Lyralii on the floor. Congratulations, Admiral. That's your new title, I believe. Lyralii laughed. Admiral of an exploration fleet made up of former enemies, heading into the complete unknown to represent a government that didn't exist a year ago. How did my life become a science fiction novel?
The same way all our lives did, Marcus replied.
We chose to believe that things could be better.
They were interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Sarah Kim, who had been appointed as the mission's chief scientist. I hate to interrupt the celebration, she said, but we have a problem with crew selection.
What kind of problem? Lyralii asked. The good kind. We have over 10,000 applications for a mission with crew space for 800.
Every species in the Confederation wants to participate.
Lyralii felt a surge of pride mixed with anxiety.
The response demonstrated the success of their new approach to galactic governance, but it also highlighted the enormous responsibility she was accepting. We'll make it work, she decided. Expand the mission profile. Instead of one large ship, we'll use a small fleet. More opportunities for participation, better redundancy, and a chance for different species to contribute their unique capabilities.
Dr. Kim smiled. I was hoping you'd say that.
I've already identified 17 different technologies that could enhance the mission if we integrate them properly.
As they discussed logistics, Lyralii found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment.
A year ago, she had been a prize claimed in battle, her life controlled by others' decisions. Today, she was freely choosing to lead an expedition that would carry the hopes of hundreds of worlds into the unknown. There's one more thing, Marcus said as their meeting concluded.
A personal request.
Oh? When you come back from Andromeda, however, many years from now, I'd like to take you to Earth.
Show you where all this started. Lyralii tilted her head curiously. What's on Earth that I need to see? Baseball games. Jazz concerts. Messy democratic town halls where humans argue about everything and, somehow reach decisions anyway. Marcus smiled. I want to show you what we were fighting to preserve. And, what we were fighting to share, Lyralii added.
3 months later, the Confederation exploration fleet departed for Andromeda from the same orbital shipyards where Imperial warships had once been constructed. The flagship New Dawn carried a crew of 847 beings representing 23 different species, their mission to make contact with whatever civilizations they might find and offer the galaxy's newest export, the choice to govern themselves. As the fleet engaged its experimental hyperspace drives and vanished into the void between galaxies, those left behind continued the harder work of building a civilization based on cooperation rather than conquest. The Empire was dead, but what had replaced it was still being born, shaped by billions of choices made freely by beings who had finally learned that freedom wasn't chaos, it was the foundation of every great accomplishment in galactic history. In the end, that might be humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy, not their technology or their tactics, but their stubborn insistence that people could govern themselves if given the chance. And, across the galaxy, on worlds that had known only imperial rule for 3 millennia, beings were discovering that humans had been right all along. The future belonged to those bold enough to choose it.